A storm erupted inside the House of Commons, and it was the kind of storm that no one could have predicted. On one side stood Rachel Reeves, the Labour Party's Shadow Chancellor, confident and armed with sharp words meant to corner the government. On the other side was Mel Stride, the Conservative MP who has never been shy about hitting back when he sees an opportunity. What unfolded next was not just another exchange of political words, it became one of the most unforgettable moments of the session, leaving even seasoned MPs wide-eyed at what they had just witnessed. Reeves, known for her fiery tone, thought she had the upper hand, but within moments the tables turned in a way that no one expected. This was not just a small clash, it became a humiliation that shook her composure, and it all happened live, in front of millions who would later watch and re-watch the clip on every social platform. The House of Commons has always been the stage for fierce battles, but there are certain confrontations that stand out because of how brutally they change the mood of the chamber. This was one of those moments. What began as a heated debate quickly transformed into a dramatic scene that left Reeves visibly rattled, struggling to respond as the government benches erupted in applause and jeers. For Labour supporters, it was painful to watch, and for Conservatives, it was a triumph to cheer. In one exchange, Mel Stride flipped the script, and Reeves, who had walked in with confidence, suddenly looked cornered. The power of this clash lies not just in what was said, but in the way it happened. Reeves, who had built her argument with precision, believed she was landing blows on the government's failures. Her words were sharp, and her delivery was strong, but Stride's reply, calculated and delivered with a cold precision, cut through her lines like a blade. It was the kind of reply that doesn't just defend a position, but leaves the opponent shaken. The chamber reacted instantly, and you could feel the weight of humiliation pressing down on Reeves as her frustration became clear. And it wasn't just about politics. This was about control, confidence, and the ability to withstand pressure in the most public arena possible. Reeves had built her reputation on being unflinching, but here she faltered. The story of this clash is not only about two MPs throwing words at each other, it is about how quickly fortunes can change in politics, how the one in control can become the one under fire in a matter of seconds. Viewers who tuned in live saw more than just an argument. They saw the raw drama of political combat, with one side left scrambling and the other basking in the uproar. This confrontation will be remembered not only because of the words exchanged, but because of how Reeves lost her composure. A single moment defined the session, and it is this moment that has sparked conversations across the country. Was it fair? Was it too harsh? Or was it simply politics at its most brutal? Whatever the answer, one fact remains clear. Rachel Reeves lost the grip she had when she began speaking, and Mel Stride walked away as the one who had humiliated an opponent live on television. To understand why this clash had such a powerful impact, we need to look at the background of the debate that day. The House of Commons was already a pressure cooker, with tempers running high and the mood tense. The country has been facing economic difficulties that affect ordinary people daily. Rising prices, wages struggling to keep up, and families squeezed by bills. These were not abstract numbers on a page. They were issues that touched lives in every part of the UK. It was within this environment that Rachel Reeves stood to speak. As Labour's Shadow Chancellor, she wanted to highlight what she saw as the government's failures, and she came prepared to attack with force. The timing was important. The debate had been building for days, with Labour promising to expose weaknesses in the Conservative approach to managing the economy. Reeves believed this was her chance to put pressure on the government and show voters that Labour had the answers. She was direct, pointing out rising living costs, criticising tax policies, and accusing the government of losing control over the financial stability of households. Every line she delivered was meant to sting, to paint a picture of a government failing the people it had promised to protect. The opposition benches cheered her on, feeding her confidence, while the government benches sat waiting for their chance to hit back. But while Reeves was attacking, there was another layer to the atmosphere. The Chancellor and his team knew that Reeves had built her reputation on being tough, but they also knew she sometimes pushed her arguments to the edge. Mel Stride, a senior Conservative who had built his own reputation as a steady and sharp debater, was listening closely. He knew that if Reeves made one mistake, one exaggeration, or left one gap in her argument, he could seize it. That silent calculation was already being made, even before he rose to his feet. The scene inside the chamber was charged. MPs leaned forward, murmuring among themselves, waiting for the exchange to unfold. Speaker of the House tried to maintain order, but in moments like this, the Commons takes on a life of its own. Every word spoken by Reeves carried weight, not just for those in the chamber, but for the cameras broadcasting live. The opposition wanted to see her dominate, while the Conservatives were hungry for a slip-up. The tension was thick because everyone knew that these debates are not just about policies, they are about public perception. Whoever comes out stronger in these moments often shapes the headlines that follow. As Reeves pressed harder, her words painted a bleak picture of the government's record. But in doing so, she set the stage for what was to come. Every sharp word raised the stakes higher, and every confident line meant that if she faltered, the fall would be harder. This is the cruel rhythm of politics in the Commons. Confidence draws applause, but overconfidence invites attack. By the time Reeves finished, the room was alive with energy. Supporters of Labour believed she had landed a strong blow, but on the Conservative benches, Mel Stride was already preparing to speak, and it was clear that he was not going to let this pass without making his mark. Rachel Reeves rose with determination, her posture reflecting the weight of responsibility she carries as Labour's Shadow Chancellor. This was not the first time she had gone head-to-head with the Conservatives on economic issues, but there was a noticeable intensity in her tone on this occasion. The cost of living crisis had been dominating headlines, and the public was looking for answers. Reeves seized the moment to present herself not just as a critic of the government, but as a voice for those struggling outside the walls of Westminster. Her argument was clear: the Conservative Party had failed the people, and it was Labour's job to expose the truth. She began with a sharp focus on household budgets. Families across Britain, she declared, were being crushed by soaring energy bills, rising food prices, and wages that were failing to keep pace with inflation. In her voice, there was both anger and urgency, a mixture that resonated strongly with her supporters. She accused the government of being out of touch with ordinary lives, saying that while ministers praised their own economic strategies, the reality on the ground was entirely different. Her words were precise and crafted to sting. People could not heat their homes, fill their fridges, or plan for the future because of the mismanagement at the top. Reeves then turned her attention to taxes, one of the most contentious areas in the debate. She argued that the Conservatives had chosen policies that protected the wealthy, while leaving working-class families to suffer. She pointed out that ordinary workers were being taxed heavily, while big corporations seemed to escape fair responsibility. Her argument was not just about numbers, it was about fairness. By presenting the situation as a moral failure, she tried to paint the government not only as incompetent, but also as uncaring. This emotional framing gave her attack more force, and it drew strong cheers from the Labour benches behind her. Her momentum built as she drew on recent reports and figures, citing statistics to back her claims. Reeves emphasised that under Conservative leadership, growth had slowed, productivity had stalled, and the gap between rich and poor had widened. She painted a bleak picture of Britain's future if the current government continued unchecked. Each line was crafted to show Labour as the party of responsibility and the Conservatives as reckless managers of the nation's finances. Her confidence grew as she saw the reaction from her colleagues, who nodded, clapped, and shouted their support. But it wasn't only the economic failures she targeted. Reeves sought to undermine the credibility of the government itself. She accused ministers of breaking promises, of delivering slogans instead of solutions, and of hiding behind excuses when challenged. Her words carried the rhythm of a prosecution case, as if she were standing in court rather than in Parliament. She was not simply debating policy, she was charging the government with negligence. It was this blend of data, emotion, and moral outrage that gave her speech its punch. The Shadow Chancellor's delivery was steady, almost rehearsed, yet filled with passion at the right moments. She wanted to show that she was not just another critic, but a leader in waiting, someone who could handle the economic brief better than those currently in power. Her aim was twofold: to weaken the government in the eyes of the public and to strengthen her own image as a capable figure who could one day take control of the Treasury. And for a while, it seemed she was succeeding. Her points landed cleanly, her tone was firm, and her authority commanded the chamber. What Reeves perhaps did not anticipate, however, was that her rising confidence was also raising the stakes. The more certain she appeared, the more pressure she placed on herself to withstand any challenge that followed. The Commons is an unforgiving place, where confidence can turn into a weakness if the opponent finds the right moment to strike. By painting such a strong picture of failure, Reeves created the perfect opportunity for her adversary to question not only her words, but her entire credibility. Her attack was strong, but it also left openings. She had thrown down the gauntlet with such force that any stumble in the reply would feel magnified. In that charged atmosphere, the Labour side celebrated her delivery, convinced that she had landed a decisive blow. But across the chamber, Mel Stride was watching closely, his expression calm, his attention sharp. Reeves had spoken with fire, but Stride was already preparing to douse that fire with a cold wave of calculated rebuttal. The silence that followed her speech was heavy, filled with expectation. And then, with the same deliberate confidence, Mel Stride prepared to rise. When Rachel Reeves finished her forceful attack, the chamber was alive with energy. The Labour benches were buzzing, their MPs convinced that she had just delivered a damaging blow to the government. Applause and cheers echoed across one side of the House, while the Conservatives sat in sharp silence, waiting for their moment to respond. It was in that pause, in that heavy silence charged with tension, that Mel Stride slowly rose to his feet. There was no rush in his movement, no display of panic or haste. He knew that all eyes were turning towards him, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had been through these battles many times before. Stride, a figure often described as calm, methodical, and precise, had been listening intently. Unlike Reeves, who used passion and fiery rhetoric, his style relied on measured delivery and careful dismantling of an opponent's argument. That balance of restraint and sharpness made him particularly dangerous in debates like this one. As he began to speak, the chamber grew quieter, as if everyone instinctively recognised that the tone of the exchange was about to shift. His opening words were deliberate, not rushed, almost surgical in how they began to chip away at the foundation Reeves had built. He started by acknowledging her points, but not in agreement. Rather, with a tone that suggested her words were exaggerated, overstated, or incomplete. By doing this, he immediately positioned himself as the voice of reason, contrasting Reeves's heated delivery with his cool, steady response. His strategy was not to match her passion, but to highlight her supposed flaws by staying calm. The more controlled he sounded, the more he made her appear emotional and reactive. This psychological shift was his first step, and it worked to pull the attention of the chamber onto his terms. Stride then began to address the core of Reeves's arguments one by one. On rising prices, he reminded the House that the global economy had been hit by unprecedented shocks. First the pandemic, then the war in Ukraine, and the resulting instability in energy markets. His point was simple but effective. The struggles of ordinary households were not simply the result of government mismanagement, but part of a wider storm that every country was facing. He painted Reeves as someone ignoring reality, preferring to score political points rather than face the hard truths. By reframing the issue in this way, he shifted the burden back onto Labour, suggesting that their criticism lacked depth and honesty. On taxes, Stride was even more direct. He accused Reeves of cherry-picking facts and presenting a distorted picture. With precise references to budget figures and tax thresholds, he claimed that the government had actually taken steps to ease pressure on working families, from targeted relief packages to measures designed to support employment. He didn't need to overwhelm the chamber with numbers. He only needed a few carefully chosen statistics to undercut Reeves's sweeping accusations. The effect was striking. Where Reeves had seemed commanding only minutes earlier, her words now began to look like half-truths when placed against Stride's calm and specific replies. What made this moment powerful was the contrast. Reeves had spoken with fire, but Stride responded with ice. And in politics, that kind of contrast can shift the mood of the entire chamber. As he continued, Stride's confidence grew more visible. His voice gained rhythm, his tone sharpened, and his words began to land more forcefully. The Conservative benches, sensing momentum, erupted with supportive cheers and desk thumping. It was no longer Reeves commanding the atmosphere. It was Stride, taking control of the narrative piece by piece. He concluded his response by turning Reeves's accusations back on her, questioning Labour's credibility on economic matters. He reminded the chamber of Labour's past record, of the financial crises that had marked their time in power, and of the lack of clear alternatives in their current proposals. This was not just a rebuttal, it was a counterattack. Stride suggested that while Reeves could criticise, she had failed to show that Labour had a workable plan of their own. With that, he flipped the argument from one about Conservative failures to one about Labour's weaknesses. By the time Stride sat down, the chamber had completely changed. The confidence Reeves had carried into her speech now seemed dented, and her once celebrated points were overshadowed by the calm dismantling they had just endured. The atmosphere in the House was no longer dominated by Labour's cheers, but by the roar of the Conservatives, energised by Stride's intervention. Reeves, who had spoken with such assurance, was left to watch as her arguments were turned against her, her composure tested under the weight of a reply that had been as sharp as it was humiliating. This was the turning point. In just a few minutes, Stride had shifted the balance of power in the chamber, and the humiliation Reeves felt was visible to anyone watching closely. The battle of words had been fierce, but in this round, it was clear that the Conservative MP had landed the heavier blows.